Sacred Heart Hospital in San Diego hums with fluorescent lights and the sharp bite of antiseptic. The kind of smell that never leaves your clothes, that seeps into your skin and reminds you at 3 a.m. what you touched that day. Megan O'Brien moves through the ICU like smoke, efficient, invisible, competent in ways that make the other nurses stop mid-conversation when she passes. She's been here 23 days. Nobody knows where she came from before that, and she's made it clear nobody needs to ask. In her locker on the 3rd floor, tucked behind her spare scrubs and the cracked coffee mug nobody will ever use, sits a pair of worn combat boots. Leather the color of old sand, laces frayed at the edges, heels compressed from thousands of miles of walking through places most people see only on the news. She touches them once each shift. Just her fingers across the toe box. A ritual no one sees. A remembering no one can understand. Her hands bear stories in white scar tissue, thin lines across the knuckles like a map of something violent and precise. The scars catch the light when she adjusts for drips at 2 in the morning, when the ward is quiet except for the ventilators and the beeping of monitors that never sleep. One nurse, Sarah, asked once how she got them. Megan said nothing. Just kept working. Sarah never asked again. Dr. Hargrove notices everything. The cardiothoracic chief with silver hair styled like a man who pays someone $300 to make him look effortlessly distinguished. 3 decades of unchallenged authority have taught him to see threats where they don't exist and allies where they shouldn't. He watches Megan during morning rounds. She has no references he can verify. No employment history before last month that checks out. Her background is a gap, a blank space, a question mark that makes his institutional power itch. To him, she represents chaos entering his ordered kingdom. The kind of chaos that erodes the carefully constructed hierarchy that took him 30 years to build. She carries the chart for room for 12 at 7:27 a.m., and something in her body language changes. Subtle. Almost invisible. Her shoulders set differently. Her jaw tightens by maybe a millimeter. She's been assigned as the primary nurse for a patient in recovery, a Marine commander named James Webb, training accident, fractured clavicle and contusions, admitted 14 hours ago. The chart says he's 34 years old, enlisted at 21, currently stationed at Camp Lejeune with 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, or Dark Horse. The chart doesn't say that his name tattoo matters. The chart doesn't say anything about Ramadi. Megan knocks before entering room for 12. The protocol. The respect. Webb is awake, lying on his back with his left arm in a sling, the kind of restless fury in his eyes that comes from a man used to moving who's been ordered to be still. When she enters, her movements are practiced, economical, nothing wasted, nothing uncertain. She checks the monitor. She adjusts the fall line. She notes his vitals on the electronic chart with the kind of focus that makes her disappear into the work. Webb glances at her name badge as she works. He sees M. O'Brien printed in clear Arial font, standard issue hospital identification. His eyes travel down to the tattoo on his own forearm, identical letters in faded blue ink from a field hospital 2 years ago. M. O'Brien. The name is burned into his muscle memory, into the part of his brain that runs tactical algorithms and survival calculations. The person who dragged him bleeding through Ramadi streets with rounds snapping past, who kept him conscious with a voice that cut through the shock like a blade through water. The person who made sure he lived to get home. He looks at the woman standing beside his bed and sees a nurse. Mid-30s maybe, brown hair pulled back, efficient hands, the kind of face that doesn't demand attention. She's not who he's looking for. The person he's looking for was different, harder edges, a voice like a tank idling in a garage, presence that made the air pressure change. Not this. This is someone else. Megan finishes the forecheck. How's the pain? 10 words maximum. Professional distance. Fine. Webb shifts. Bored out of my mind. Doctor wants you still for 48 hours. Doctor wants a lot of things. She doesn't smile. Doesn't engage beyond necessity. She just notes his response and turns to leave. As she does, Webb watches her, really watches her, for maybe 3 seconds. Something in how she moved, something in the economy of her motions, triggers a microsecond of recognition. Then she's gone. And the moment passes. And he goes back to staring at the ceiling, frustrated and impatient, with her name tattooed on his arm and absolutely no idea that the person who saved his life just changed his for. Dr. Hargrove corners Megan in the medication room at 8:19 a.m. She's pulling a 500 milliliters bag of normal saline for a post-op patient in room 408, and he materializes in the doorway with the kind of sudden presence that announces itself as deliberate. The fluorescent lights flicker once, a microsecond of darkness, and then steady again. "We'll see how long you last here, Ms. O'Brien." His voice carries the kind of practiced condescension that comes from decades of being right in rooms where he was actually wrong. This isn't some walk-in clinic. This is Sacred Heart. Standards matter. Megan doesn't turn around. She continues drawing saline, the needle entering the bag with a soft puncture sound, air bubbles rising like tiny planets in reverse. She takes one measured breath, the kind taught in rooms where mistakes kill people, and turns to face him. Her eyes are steady. Flat. The color of cold water. She says nothing. Dr. Hargrove mistakes her silence for weakness. It's the first mistake of many. Your employment history is sparse. We're used to explaining ourselves here. I explained everything in my application. Her voice is quiet. The kind of quiet that fills space rather than taking it up. Everything that needed explaining. Did you? He steps into the medication room. His wedding ring catches the fluorescent light, a Rolex at his wrist, the kind of watch that costs more than a used car. Because to me, it looks like someone with something to hide. Megan sets the saline on the counter. She meets his eyes. She does not flinch. She does not blink. She does not break. "I'm here to do my job, doctor." "Are you?" He leans against the counter in a way that suggests he's comfortable in spaces where he's powerful. We'll see how that works out. She leaves. He watches her go, and something in the set of her shoulders makes him think he's won something. He hasn't. He's just started something. But he doesn't know that yet. The morning moves like every other morning in a hospital, crisis without drama, competence without recognition. Megan works room 408, then room 410, then room 412 again at 11:34 a.m. to check Webb's pain management and adjust his medications. This time he's asleep, his face relaxed in that way people's faces relax when consciousness isn't interrogating them. She checks his vitals. Reads the monitor. Notes his heart rate at 62, blood pressure 118/76, oxygen saturation at 98%, all excellent numbers, numbers that say he's healing right on schedule. She's reaching to adjust his forecatheter when he wakes. His eyes snap open the way a Marine's eyes snap open, immediate, alert, tactical. He watches her hands work. Her fingers move with a precision that feels almost surgical, almost like they're reading something in the plastic tubing and the medication drip that most people would miss. There's something in her movements that feels familiar in a way he can't articulate. Something his body recognizes even if his conscious mind doesn't. "You're good at this." He says it like he's observing something he doesn't quite understand. Training. She doesn't look at him. She adjusts the fall rate, reduces it by 2 milliliters per hour. "How's the pain?" "Same. Manageable. I'll tell the doctor we can hold on the increase." She leaves before he can respond. And Webb lies there, listening to the ventilators wheeze in the rooms around him, watching the door where she disappeared, with her name tattooed on his arm and the growing sense that something in his world is fundamentally out of alignment. Dr. Hargrove observes her during the 12:41 p.m. intake for a new admission in room 414. A 67-year-old male post-op, recovering from a valve replacement. Standard paperwork. Standard routine. But Megan's hands tremor slightly, just a micromillimeter of motion, as she fills out the digital intake forms. Dr. Hargrove notices. He notices everything. What he doesn't notice is why. What he doesn't see is that her hands aren't trembling from fear. They are trembling from muscle memory. From something her body remembers about filling out forms under fluorescent lights with people watching. From a time when one wrong entry could cost lives. From a life before Sacred Heart that she's not allowed to talk about and can't forget. He also doesn't see how she positions herself in the room. Always with walls at her back. Never facing the door without seeing it in her peripheral vision. The way her eye scan exits the way other nurses scan monitors. Those aren't the behaviors of a nervous new hire. Those are the behaviors of someone trained to survive in places where not seeing the exit means not surviving at all. But Dr. Hargrove isn't trained in reading tactical positioning. He's trained in reading hierarchies and protocols and the subtle languages of institutional power. He sees trembling hands and thinks weakness. She finishes the intake at 12:48 p.m. and steps into the hallway where the nurse's station hums with phones ringing and monitors beeping and the constant low-level chaos that is the soundtrack of saving lives. Someone's paging cardiology. Someone else is asking if anyone's seen the crash cart. And somewhere above all that noise, Sarah from the morning shift is telling the night shift about a patient in room 409 whose blood pressure keeps spiking. Megan listens while writing her notes. She doesn't appear to be listening. She's just working. Just focused on her screen. But her awareness is spatial and total, the way it's always been, the way it has to be when you work in places where people die quickly and without warning. The afternoon stretches toward evening. Room 412 lies quietly in the northern section of the ICU, where Webb sleeps and dreams about training accidents that weren't accidents and names tattooed in blue ink 2 years ago. In her locker, down on the 3rd floor, Megan's worn combat boots sit in the darkness, waiting for her to touch them one more time before she leaves. The kind of waiting that knows something is coming. The kind of quiet that always comes before a storm. What neither of them knows yet is that storm is already forming. Dr. Hargrove is making a mental note. He's adding Megan O'Brien to the list of people who don't fit his institutional framework. And he's already beginning to think about how he'll extract her from his kingdom, how he'll prove she doesn't belong. He has no idea what she is. He has no idea what she's done. He has no idea that the person he's about to go to war with has already survived wars that would break most men like pencils. But the hospital's fluorescent lights hum on, indifferent to what's coming, while somewhere in the building, a Marine commander sleeps with a tattoo on his arm and a face he can't quite remember, and Megan O'Brien moves through the corridors like a ghost, waiting for something she's been waiting for since the day someone gave her an order to disappear. The staff lounge at Sacred Heart hummed with the white noise of a shift change, fluorescent lights casting everything in a sickly institutional glow. Nurses in wrinkled scrubs clustered around the coffee station, trading complaints about patient loads and overtime. Dr. Hargrove stood by the counter like a man who owned the room, because in his mind, he did. He'd spent 23 years building his cardiothoracic empire here, and he had no intention of letting some mysterious newcomer with gaps in her employment history threaten that architecture. "I'm making a formal prediction," he announced, voice carrying across the lounge with the confidence of a man accustomed to being heard. His residents circled around him like satellites. "Our mysterious new nurse won't last a week here. Anyone want to take that bet?" He smiled, the kind of smile that was less about humor and more about dominance. "I'm thinking she quits by Friday." His residents erupted in laughter. The other nurses exchanged glances but said nothing. Hargrove's power ran too deep through these corridors, 3 board members who answered his calls, an auditor he'd placed on the credentialing committee years ago, residents who'd learned that his favor was currency and his displeasure was career death. Megan sat in the corner with her lunch, a sandwich that tasted like cardboard no matter how long she chewed it. She kept her eyes on the bread, on the letters, on anything that wasn't his face. She took one slow breath through her nose. The kind of breath she'd learned to take in Ramadi when mortars fell close enough that you could taste the dust. Just air. Just oxygen. Just another moment that would pass if you let it. A single tear escaped down her cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, deliberately slow, deliberately visible only to herself. Then she took another bite of her sandwich. Chewed. Swallowed. Continued existing in a room where a man was betting on her failure and his residents were laughing at a prediction they all seemed certain would come true. Hargrove watched her from across the room, satisfied. He'd seen the tear. That was the point. 2 days later, the cafeteria was packed with a midday crush, physicians, nurses, residents, administrative staff all converging during the narrow window when the salad bar was fully stocked. Megan carried her tray carefully, her movements precise and economical, the way someone moves when they're aware of every inch of space around them. Turkey sandwich, side salad, water with lemon. She passed the doctor's table where Hargrove sat holding court, telling some story about a surgery that had gone brilliantly because of his intervention, naturally. As she walked past, his foot extended into her path with the casual cruelty of a man testing whether anyone would actually hold him accountable. The tray crashed to the floor. The sound was immediate and absolute, soup exploding across tile in a scalding spray, silverware clattering like a small war, the plate shattering into 3 pieces. The entire cafeteria seemed to freeze in that moment, the way crowds do when someone's humiliation is on display. Megan's sandwich landed face down on linoleum next to a spreading puddle of tomato bisque. "So clumsy," Hargrove said loudly, his voice traveling through the sudden quiet. His residents erupted in laughter, the exact performance he'd orchestrated. "Maybe nursing isn't your calling. Have you thought about a different line of work?" The room filled with the sound of his residents' laughter and the smell of spilled soup, warm, metallic, expensive. It smelled like waste. Megan knelt slowly, began gathering the pieces with steady hands. One tear slid down her face as she picked up each fragment of plate, each piece of sandwich now inedible and ruined. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, stood with the destroyed tray, and walked to the disposal without looking back. Never broke stride. Never spoke. Never gave him the satisfaction of seeing her break. The other nurses watched. Several had the decency to look ashamed that they'd laughed or said nothing. None of them would confront Hargrove. That was the calculus of hospital politics. He was the chief, they were the staff, and there was no mechanism in this institution for holding him accountable to anyone but himself. What they didn't know was that Megan had carried heavier things than humiliation through worse places than a hospital cafeteria. But she kept walking anyway. The next afternoon, room 412's patient chart needed updating before rounds. Megan was walking through the ICU hallway when she saw Dr. Hargrove emerge from the nursing station, chart in hand, his residents forming a half-circle behind him like remoras around a shark. He'd been waiting for her. That much was clear from the way he positioned himself, the deliberate angle of his stance. He threw the chart at her feet. Paper scattered across the floor in a cascade, vital signs, medication orders, progress notes, lab results all splaying across the tile in a fan of white. The sound of paper hitting linoleum echoed through the hallway like applause for his own cruelty. "Pick that up, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with false solicitation. "Let's see if you can handle basic tasks." His residents had their phones out. Not even bothering to hide it anymore. They wanted footage. They wanted to capture her moment of complete professional humiliation and share it with other residents on the program, further cementing the message that this new nurse was beneath them, outside the protective circle that kept you safe in a place like this. Megan stared at the scattered pages for exactly 3 seconds. She took one measured breath, the kind that comes from muscle memory, from 1,000 moments of danger where panic meant death and control meant survival. A tear escaped as she bent to retrieve the pages, her movements economical and precise. She wiped it away before straightening, the papers now sorted and reassembled with the kind of precision that came from hands that had held more than paper together in crisis. When she stood, she looked directly into his eyes, no fear, no tremor, just a simple acknowledgement of what he was and what she was no longer going to pretend not to be. "I've carried heavier things than your ego, doctor," she said quietly. The hallway froze. Hargrove's face reddened in a way that suggested no one had ever spoken to him that way before. His residents stopped recording. The machines in the nearby patient rooms continued their steady beeping, indifferent to institutional hierarchies and the small moments when someone decided they would not be broken by someone else's power. She was already walking away, the chart assembled perfectly in her hands, before he could formulate a response. That night, he made the first call. His voice was smooth with the kind of concern that sounds almost genuine if you don't listen too carefully. He called one of the 3 board members he kept in his network, the ones who answered immediately when his number came through, the ones who understood that Hargrove's problems were their problems. "We may have a credentialing issue with one of the new nurses," he said, his tone conveying deep professional worry. "Gaps in her employment history that don't add up. References that don't check out. I think we need to look deeper before something happens on my watch." He made 2 more calls that night. By morning, the machinery was in motion. The auditor on the credentialing committee received his message. The California Board of Nursing received a formal inquiry. The walls were closing in from directions she couldn't see, following a logic she couldn't predict, orchestrated by a man who had spent 23 years learning exactly how to use institutional power like a weapon. What happened next didn't just change Megan's week. It changed everything. Room for 12 erupted at 2:48 p.m. Commander Webb's chest heaved. His lips turned blue. The color drained from his face in seconds, not gradual, not slow, but catastrophic. He sat bolt upright in bed, hands clawing at his ribs, gasping for air that wouldn't come. His eyes were wide. Panicked. The monitors screamed their warnings, oxygen saturation plummeting from 96 to 87 to 72. Heart rate climbing. Blood pressure spiking. Megan was in the hallway when she heard it, not the alarms, though those shrieked loud enough. She heard the specific quality of the gasping. The sound a man makes when one lung has stopped working entirely. She moved before conscious thought caught up. 15 years of muscle memory doesn't wait for permission. His chest was hyperresonant on the right side, she could hear it the moment she entered the room. Trachea deviated to the left. The clinical signs assembled themselves like a diagnosis written in anatomical shorthand. Tension pneumothorax. Air trapped in the pleural space, collapsing his right lung, shifting his heart, crushing the vessels that kept him alive. The training accident 2 years ago had fractured his ribs. The healing had been clean. But sometimes healing left weaknesses. Sometimes trauma created time bombs. Webb gasped her name. Or tried to. Just a sound, desperate and drowning. "Where's the code team?" he managed, his voice thin as tissue paper. "Not here yet," she said, and didn't hesitate. 2 minutes. She didn't say, "You won't have 2 minutes." She didn't need to. They both understood the mathematics of a collapsing lung. The crash cart was 12 feet away. She crossed the distance in 3 strides, her hands already knowing what they needed before her mind finished calculating. The 14-gauge needle was in a medication drawer. She'd memorized the layout on her first shift, back when Dr. Hargrove was still deciding whether to destroy her. Force of habit. The habit of someone who'd learned that knowing where your tools lived meant the difference between a patient who walked out and one who didn't. She turned back to Webb. His skin had taken on a waxy gray quality, the color of someone whose oxygen saturation had dropped to the territory where the brain starts dying. Where everything starts dying. "This is going to hurt," she said, not gentle, not soft, just factual. Military voice. The voice that expects compliance because the alternative is death. She didn't wait for his nod. Her left hand palpated his chest, finding the landmarks with the precision of muscle memory written in blood and sand. Second intercostal space. Midclavicular line. The anatomical real estate where you put the needle when a man's lung has collapsed and gravity is running out of time. The fluorescent lights above buzzed their mechanical drone, indifferent to everything happening below them. The needle went in. Not hesitant. Not testing. The decisive puncture of someone who'd done this in a Humvee driving through Ramadi while incoming fire dotted the windows, who'd done this in a forward operating base with nothing but flashlight and steady hands, who'd done this because the alternative was letting a man die in the sand. The hiss came immediately. Air. Escaped air. The sound of pressure releasing, of a collapsed system venting back to equilibrium. Webb's chest expanded like a bellows finally working again. His mouth opened. He gulped air like a drowning man breaking the surface of the ocean, like someone being born backward into the world of oxygen and living things. Color rushed back into his face, not all the way, but enough. Enough to be alive instead of dying. His eyes locked on hers. Something flickered there. Recognition, maybe. Or just the intensity of a man who'd been 3 minutes from death and was still watching the woman who'd pulled him back. He tried to speak. His mouth moved. Her name, maybe. A question. But before he could form the words, the door burst open. The code team arrived like cavalry responding to a battle that had already been won. Residents and nurses, equipment and controlled chaos, all of it flooding in with the urgency of a hospital that still thought they were racing against time. Behind them came Dr. Hargrove. He took in the scene in a single visual sweep, Webb breathing. Megan's hand still steady on the needle. The crash cart deployed. The monitors showing oxygen saturation climbing, now 78, now 82, now 87. The numbers moving in the right direction because she'd done the procedure exactly right. His face went cold. The kind of cold that comes not from emotion but from the recognition that authority has been circumvented. That someone below him in the hierarchy has acted without permission. That the order he'd built this hospital on, his order, his control, had just been violated. "What have you done?" he demanded. Not asked. Demanded, the way a man demands when he's already decided on the crime. Tension pneumothorax, Megan said, her voice steady as stone. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Pressure release completed. Oxygen saturation rising. He had approximately 90 seconds remaining. Not asterisk I saved his life. Asterisk the facts. Clean and clinical and impossible to argue with. You performed an invasive procedure without physician authorization, Hargrove said, and now his voice was rising, the way a man's voice rises when he can feel control slipping through his fingers. You violated every protocol in this hospital. Every regulation. You could have caused catastrophic hemorrhage. Tension hemo. She saved my life, Webb said, his voice still rough but getting stronger, his lungs remembering how to work. She knew what was happening before. That's not how we practice medicine here, Commander. Hargrove cut him off, silencing him with the sheer force of institutional authority. He turned to the code team, his eyes cold and calculating. Document everything. Every second. This is a board-level violation. Potential criminal negligence. The residents and nurses exchanged glances but said nothing. In hospital hierarchies, you don't contradict a chief. You survive by staying quiet and remembering which way the institutional wind blows. Megan was already removing the needle, her movements precise and unhurried. She placed it on the crash cart, then turned toward the door. She didn't look at Webb. Didn't acknowledge the gratitude in his eyes or the question that was still forming on his lips. Professionalism. Discipline. The kind of composure that comes from understanding that emotion is a luxury she couldn't afford. Dr. Hargrove made 3 phone calls in the next 20 minutes. The first was to Bradley Sterling, board member and country club buddy, framing Megan's life-saving action as reckless and dangerous, a nurse operating outside her scope of practice, a security threat to patient safety. I handled it immediately, Hargrove said, his voice calm and concerned and perfectly calibrated to convey that he was the responsible party here, the adult in the room, the guardian of standards. The second was to the auditor sitting on the credentialing committee, the one Hargrove had placed there 5 years ago during a previous reorganization, the one who understood that loyalty flowed downhill and favors created debts. Expedite the review, Hargrove said. I'm concerned about patient safety. The third was to hospital security. I need officers at Sacred Heart. Immediately. This is a potential threat situation. By 3:42 p.m., 2 security guards in Navy uniforms appeared at the nurses' station with a manila envelope and expressions that said they'd rather be anywhere else. They had the professional courtesy of men who'd done this before, removing people who'd made the wrong enemies. Megan was already gathering her things when they arrived. Someone had told her, or maybe she'd just known. The way a person knows when the ground has shifted beneath them. The letter was formal. Suspension pending investigation. Violation of hospital policy. Unauthorized practice of advanced medical procedures. The words were precise and clinical and designed to build a case for termination that no lawyer could unravel. "We'll need you to empty your locker," one of the officers said, not unkindly. He was older, maybe 50, with a weathered face of someone who'd seen institutional justice work more often than actual justice. He handed her a cardboard box. "You can take personal items only." Megan walked to her locker in the break room. Other nurses watched but pretended not to. The unspoken rule of hierarchies is that you don't acknowledge the falling. You just wait for the dust to settle and hope you're not next. The locker held nothing much. A cracked mug that said "World's Best Mom" in fading letters. Marcus had made it in 3rd grade, wrapped in tissue paper and hope. A dying succulent in a ceramic pot, brown at the edges, surviving through sheer stubbornness. And the photograph. Her husband in dress uniform, 2006, San Diego waterfront, both of them so young they looked like people in a movie about other people's lives. He'd been dead for 2 years now. Still, she carried him in a cardboard box when she was being escorted out of hospitals. And the boots. Not in the locker, never in the locker where anyone could see. But under the locker, beneath a false panel she'd installed on her 3rd day. Worn desert combat boots with sand still in the creases, classified unit patches on the sides, the kind of footwear that had carried her through places that no longer officially existed. She didn't reach for them. Not with security watching. Those boots stayed hidden for now. She filled the cardboard box with the photograph, the mug, the plant, and nothing else that mattered. The life you can fit in a box is the life you can walk away from. Everything real stays behind. The lobby was full of staff when she left, doctors and nurses and administrators all finding reasons to be in the same space, all aware that something was happening, that the hierarchy had just recalibrated itself. Dr. Hargrove stood near the elevators in his white coat, accepting sympathetic nods from colleagues who understood exactly what he'd done and why he'd done it. The responsible thing. The necessary thing. The thing that protected everyone else from the risk she represented. "I'm truly sorry it came to this," one of the surgeons said to Hargrove, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But you made the right call." Hargrove nodded with the gratitude of a man who'd just successfully eliminated a threat to institutional order. Megan didn't break stride. She walked past them all, the judges, the witnesses, the silent collaborators, and pushed through the glass doors into the San Diego afternoon where the rain hadn't started yet but was coming. She stood at the bus stop 2 blocks away, cardboard box in her hands, and for the first time in 18 years, Megan O'Brien had nowhere to be and no one to call and a nursing license that would be under investigation by morning. The clouds gathered overhead like an understanding. But that wasn't the worst part. The needle went in. 02 climbing. 75, 82. 88, stable. Webb's chest rose with his first full breath in 90 seconds, and the code team was still 2 floors away when Dr. Hargrove walked through the ICU doors. He stopped. His eyes moved from Webb's rising chest to Megan's hands, still steady on the needle, to her face, calm as a stone in moving water. The color drained from his expression, replaced by something colder. Not gratitude. Recognition of authority he didn't possess in his own kingdom. She hadn't called for backup. She hadn't waited for the hierarchy to save this man. She had simply moved, and he had watched her do it. Hargrove's jaw clenched. He turned without a word and walked back out. Megan continued monitoring the needle, counting Webb's respirations, watching the pulse oximeter climb toward normal. A nurse beside her whispered, "That was incredible." Megan didn't answer. She already knew what was coming. She'd seen this pattern before, the moment someone showed you their real power, and institutions mobilized to erase you for it. The phone on Hargrove's desk rang at 2:16 p.m. His voice carried through the administrative corridor like a blade being honed. "Richard, I need to discuss an urgent credentialing concern regarding one of our nursing staff. The board member on the line listened as Hargrove outlined his suspicions, the sudden appearance, the employment history that materialized only a month ago, the suspicious background that wouldn't verify through standard channels. I'm simply being cautious, Hargrove said, his tone dripping with concern. The patient's safety implications are significant. The second call came at 3:15. Different board member, same rehearsed concern. We have a nurse with no verifiable employment history prior to 4 weeks ago performing unsupervised interventions. The credential gaps are troubling, wouldn't you agree? The voice on the other end made appropriate sounds of worry. Hargrove's genius wasn't in the accusation, it was in the question. He never said she was dangerous. He simply asked if it was concerning that they couldn't prove she wasn't. By 3:40, the third call was made. This time, he spoke to the outside auditor he'd placed on the credentialing committee 4 years prior, a favor from a favor, a network within a network. I'm requesting a formal investigation into a staff member's background. I have documentation concerns. I'd appreciate your personal attention to this matter. The auditor, indebted and compliant, agreed immediately. Within minutes, a formal inquiry was initiated. At 4:12 p.m., a letter arrived in Megan's mailbox in the staff lounge. State letterhead. California Board of Nursing. The words blurred together: investigation, background verification, suspicious circumstances, pending review, immediate suspension of certain duties pending outcome. The letter wasn't from Hargrove. It was from the state itself, or rather, from the machinery Hargrove had assembled and wound up like a clock designed to strike exactly when he released it. Megan read it once. Twice. Her hands didn't shake. They never did. By 4:45 p.m., security was waiting at the nurse's station. Ms. O'Brien, you'll need to come with us. Not a request. A procedure. Professional. The kind of escort that looked reasonable to anyone watching, even though it was theater built on sand. Hargrove had orchestrated it perfectly. He wasn't firing her directly. He was simply allowing the system to do what he'd programmed it to do. The head of HR walked beside her. Pending the outcome of the credentialing review, your employment is suspended effective immediately. We'll need your badge and your credentials. You can collect your personal items from your locker. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and betrayal. Megan's boots echoed on the tile with each step. Colleagues looked up, then looked away, uncertain what was happening but certain it was official. Her locker was small. A spare jacket. The cracked mug her son had given her in 6th grade, world's best mom, fading from 1,000 washings. A dying succulent she'd kept on the corner of the desk, brown and wilted but alive. A photograph of her husband in dress uniform, taken 6 months before Ramadi took him. And the worn combat boots, the one she'd hidden in the darkness of the locker, hoping one day she could wear them in public without triggering a cascade of questions she couldn't answer. She stuffed everything into a cardboard box the HR assistant provided. The mug clinked against the frame. The succulent soil spilled across the photograph. The boots went on last, heavy and real, the only things in the box that had ever been to war. You can appeal the suspension through the formal process, the assistant said, handing her a packet of paperwork. Typically these reviews take 30 to 60 days. 30 to 60 days. Time enough for rumors to calcify into truth, for doubt to become institutional fact, for everyone to forget that she'd saved a man's life 3 hours earlier. The rain started as she walked out of Sacred Heart's main entrance. Not a drizzle. Real rain, the kind that came in from the Pacific and soaked through everything. Her scrubs were still damp with the afternoon. The box grew heavy as water seeped into the cardboard. She stood at the bus stop across from the hospital, the box pressed against her chest like a final relic. The mug was getting wet. The photo was getting wet. The succulent's dying leaves were plastered against the cardboard. She didn't move to protect any of it. The rain hammered down like applause for a performance she'd given without meaning to, without wanting to, without any way to take it back. A car passed, its tire hit a puddle, and gutter water splashed across her shoes. She stood there. Still. Quiet. The weight of 2 years pressed down, 2 years of erasing herself, of swallowing insults, of hiding who she was, of following the order to disappear. She'd done everything right. She'd taken the humiliation without breaking, kept her composure, never revealed what she actually was capable of. And the moment she did what she was trained to do, save a life without hesitation, without protocol, without permission, the system turned on her like it had before. Her phone buzzed. "Marcus, Mom, where are you?" Then, "Mom." Then, "Answer me." She didn't answer. She stood in the rain at the bus stop, holding a cardboard box of everything that proved she'd existed, watching Sacred Heart's glass doors through the downpour, and for the first time since Ramadi, she let the world break. Inside, on the 3rd floor, Commander Webb was regaining consciousness, the anesthesia wearing off, his lungs expanding with each breath that should have never happened. A nurse checked his vital signs. A resident entered to examine the decompression site. Webb's eyes moved to the empty space beside his bed where Megan had been standing for 3 days without him seeing her, and then something shifted in his memory, the way she'd moved, the absolute stillness in her hands, the one sentence she'd said when he'd asked if she'd served. "A lifetime ago, sir." "Where's the nurse?" he asked, his voice rough from the endotracheal tube they'd removed. "The one who was just here." The resident checked the chart. "We're not sure, sir. There's been some kind of credentialing issue. She's been suspended pending review." "Suspended? Why?" "I don't have those details." Webb's hand moved to his forearm, to the tattoo inked there 2 years ago, the name that had become a prayer and a curse. "M. the Brian." He said it aloud. "The nurse here. What's her first name?" "Megan, I believe." The room seemed to move sideways. The tattoo on his arm wasn't just coincidence. It wasn't just the universe being kind. It was a rope thrown across 2 years of searching, finally pulled tight. He grabbed his phone with trembling hands and made a call to his commanding officer. "Sir, I need you to verify something for me. A nurse named Megan O'Brien. Senior Chief. San Diego area. I think I found her. I think I finally found her." His voice cracked on the last word. "I need everything you have. I need to know how to bring her back." Commander Webb spent the night making calls. His hospital room phone became a lifeline, his muscled shoulders propped against regulation pillows while his fingers punched numbers with the precision of someone used to operating under stress. He called the 160th SAW Night Stalkers first, pilots who knew what it meant to trust your life to someone's steady hands. Then the Bureau of Naval Personnel. Then a journalist at the San Diego Tribune who'd covered military transitions for years. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd finally connected the dots, the quiet nurse with the haunted eyes, the name tattooed on his forearm in Ramadi 2 years ago, the hands that had dragged him through minefield fire when everything was screaming and dark. By 6 a.m., he'd made 17 calls. Each one started the same way: "I need you to understand who you're protecting." By sunrise, people were listening. Marcus O'Brien pushed through Sacred Heart's main entrance at exactly 9 a.m., and the lobby air shifted like pressure before a storm. The 17-year-old moved with a precision that suggested genetics, his mother's straightness in the spine, her refusal to flinch, but his eyes burned with something pure, rage and love braided together, the kind that only a son protecting his mother could carry. His hands trembled. Not from fear. From restraint. He carried a shadow box. The case was mahogany, aged like something sacred, and inside it rested 5 medals positioned on navy blue velvet. The morning light caught the brass and ribbon, colors that meant things. Things that changed wars. Things that saved lives. A press camera crew was already waiting near the information desk, tipped off by Commander Webb's calls during the night. Hospital staff slowed their morning routines, sensing something. Marcus opened the case in the center of the lobby where Dr. Hargrove's influence had once felt absolute. The space filled with the subtle click of hinges, a small mechanical sound that somehow silenced the room. My mother, Marcus said, his voice steady as a heartbeat monitor, is Senior Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien. He didn't shout. Didn't need to. The words landed like a defibrillator shock, stopping everything. A Navy nurse in blue scrubs stepped forward from the crowd, her hand shaking as she opened a folder marked with red, declassified stamps. Her eyes widened as she read. 2 tours. Special Operations Medical Support. 3 combat Valor citations, she said, and the words seemed impossible, sacred, dangerous, the kind of information that had been locked behind Pentagon security for 2 years. Served with JSOC task force elements in Ramadi from 2019 to 2021. A man in civilian clothes emerged from the gathered crowd, and the way people parted told you everything. SEAL Team 3, Charlie Platoon callsign Reaper, the kind of operator who recognized other operators even when they wore stethoscopes. His voice came out rough, like it hadn't been used for talking, only for commands. Bronze Star with Valor. He pointed at the first medal. Purple Heart. The second. Navy Commendation Medal with Combat V. The third. Then he looked directly at Marcus, and his jaw clenched. She carried 4 wounded Marines through a minefield in Ramadi while taking fire. Small arms, IED shrapnel, mortars, everything the enemy had. She didn't stop. Didn't even slow down. The cameras caught every angle of his face. The cameras caught Marcus standing frozen, holding his mother's history like a living thing. The cameras caught staff members whose hands had worked alongside Megan, who'd thought they knew her, who'd accepted Dr. Hargrove's dismissals without question. The cameras caught the exact moment they realized they'd been wrong. An FBI liaison stepped to a microphone someone had quickly positioned. The badge on his hip caught light, FBI Field Office, San Diego Division. His words came formal, clipped, official. Operation Amber Shield is now declassified by presidential order. Senior Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien's service record is being fully restored. Her actions in Ramadi prevented the loss of an estimated 14 American lives. She carried 4 wounded service members across 847 meters of hostile terrain under sustained fire. Her decision saved those men. Saved them. He paused, letting that settle into the hospital's climate-controlled air. The Navy acknowledges the cost of that service. The nation acknowledges the cost. And then the 2-star Admiral walked through the lobby doors. Dr. Hargrove's face went colorless. Not the blush of embarrassment. The white of complete institutional collapse happening in real time. The Admiral moved like someone used to moving through rooms that belonged to him, and he cut Hargrove off before the cardiothoracic chief could even open his mouth. His voice carried no volume because it didn't need to. Authority that had commanded fleets didn't require projection. Dr. Hargrove. You're terminated for gross negligence in vetting a false complaint and for deliberate retaliation against a service member in your employ. Security, escort him out. 2 uniformed officers stepped forward. They weren't hospital security, they moved like they had authority that came from somewhere bigger than Sacred Heart's administration. They moved like they'd done this before. Hargrove's hands moved toward something: protest, explanation, desperation. The Admiral's expression didn't change. One cold stare. That's all it took. The cameras captured 6 angles of it, Dr. Hargrove's face going pale as hospital security escorted him toward the exit. His colleagues who'd nodded sympathetically at his complaints now looking away, suddenly urgent about appointments and rounds. His decades of careful authority dissolving in the time it took for a security badge to be deactivated. In the parking lot, news vans were already setting up for evening broadcasts. By afternoon, the story would be everywhere: hospital chief fires decorated war hero nurse. By evening, the hospital board would release statements condemning Hargrove's actions. By the next morning, lawyers would be placing calls about the 3 other nurses he'd retaliated against using the same playbook. But in that moment, in that lobby, there was only silence. The fluorescent lights hummed their institutional song, and nobody moved. Then Megan O'Brien walked through the main entrance. She wasn't in scrubs. Wasn't in uniform. She wore civilian clothes that hung loose on her frame, evidence of 2 nights eating nothing but gas station coffee. She was carrying a cardboard box. The combat boots were visible at the top, worn leather that had walked through 2 wars. Marcus saw her first and moved toward her with the momentum of 17 years of classified secrets finally making sense. When she understood what had happened, when she saw the medals, heard the words, felt the shift in how the room was breathing, her composure fractured. Not in a way that looked like weakness. In a way that looked like someone finally allowed to exist. Commander Webb approached slowly, and his hospital gown had been replaced with a Marine Corps sweatshirt that fit across shoulders that had been through their own hell. He moved with the careful precision of someone still recovering, but his eyes carried full recognition now. "Senior Chief," he said quietly, and the words meant everything, "I remember Ramadi. I remember your voice. I remember my own blood on your hands and your voice telling me stay with me, stay breathing. I've been looking for you for 2 years. I looked for you everywhere," Webb said, and there was no performance in it, no audience required. Just truth. Megan's voice dropped an octave when she answered. "I know." And they embraced like the warriors they were, cameras capturing the moment, the lobby breaking into spontaneous applause that felt like something earned rather than given. The Admiral's words came after. Immediate reinstatement. Formal hospital apology. And then the offer, "We're creating a new position, Director of Emergency Medicine with full authority over trauma protocols and combat medic transition training." Megan looked at Marcus. At the medals. At the combat boots in the cardboard box finally allowed to exist in daylight. She accepted. Over the following weeks, Sacred Heart Hospital transformed. Megan's office became legend before she'd even arranged her desk, windows overlooking the ER, shadow box gleaming under desk lamplight, combat boots displayed on a shelf like artifacts from another war. She ran training sessions for nurses transitioning from military medicine, teaching the needle decompression procedure that had saved Commander Webb, teaching the kind of decision-making that happened in 1.3 seconds and saved lives. Webb himself visited regularly, now fully recovered, and they developed the easy camaraderie of people who'd survived each other at their absolute worst. 6 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon when rain hammered the parking lot like applause, Commander Webb stopped by her office with coffee and news. "Thought you'd want to know," he said casually, setting down 2 cups. "Saw Dr. Hargrove yesterday. Selling insurance policies from a folding table outside a strip mall on El Cajon Boulevard. Rain pouring down. He looked smaller." Megan set down her pen. She considered this information for a long moment, feeling no satisfaction, no vindication, no need for it. The man who'd tried to destroy her was now reduced to desperation in a parking lot, and she gave him exactly what he deserved, acknowledgement, filed away, then released. She nodded once. "You're a better person than me, Senior Chief," Webb said, grinning despite himself. "Just tired, Commander," she answered, but warmth lived in it. Marcus stopped by after school that same week, now a senior planning to enlist as a Navy corpsman. He carried himself like someone finally allowed to exist, shoulders back, eyes clear, proud of a mother he could finally talk about. The 3 of them sat in Megan's office trading stories when a young nurse knocked hesitantly. "Director O'Brien?" Tension pneumothorax in the ER. "The code team is asking." "I'll do more than talk them through it," Megan said, already standing, muscle memory taking over like breathing. She grabbed her stethoscope, engraved now with her service dates, and headed for the ER with Webb and Marcus trailing behind. In the hallway, she passed Sacred Heart's photo display, Operation Amber Shield, declassified, showing a younger Megan in combat gear carrying wounded Marines through Ramadi streets. Hospital staff pointed it out to new hires now. It had become part of the institution's identity. "This is who we are. This is the standard." In the ER bay, Megan saved another life with the same hands that had saved for Marines in a minefield, that had saved Commander Webb when his lung collapsed and everything was screaming. Afterward, she found Marcus and Webb waiting, and together they walked into the San Diego evening. Megan looked back once at Sacred Heart's lights, and Webb noticed. "You found your way home, Senior Chief," he said quietly. "We both did, Commander," she answered. And this is the thing about heroes, sometimes they carry stethoscopes, not guns. Sometimes they work in hospitals where the only battles are the ones fought against time and gravity and human fragility. Sometimes they're the quiet person you work beside for weeks before discovering they've already saved entire lives in places the world doesn't see. And sometimes, when the truth finally surfaces, it doesn't just change one hospital, it changes how we see everyone around us, reminding us that the person pushing a medication cart or changing your floor might be carrying stories that would make your blood run cold and your heart sing at the same time. If you know someone like Megan, someone whose quiet competence hides a deeper strength, someone who's sacrificed more than they'll ever say, share their story. Not for recognition. For understanding. Because the bravest warriors among us often don't look like warriors at all. They look like someone you see every day and don't quite recognize until someone finally opens a shadow box and shows you the truth. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because we're finding more of these stories every week. Leave a comment below about the unsung heroes in your own life, the people whose sacrifices you've witnessed or whose strength helped you survive something you thought would break you. They deserve to be seen,